Kia ora koutou. I'm Patricia Pillay and I'm joined by Dr. Monica Tromp, who is an archaeological scientist and works with the Southern Pacific Archaeological Research Consultancy housed within the Archaeology Department at the University of Otago. Monica, it's such a pleasure to talk to you today. Could you please tell us a little bit about your job and the types of analyses you use to answer questions about the human past?
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to talk about my work. It's an exciting thing to do. So I'm going to start and I'm going to have some visual aids to go along with my talk, because what I study is either things you need a microscope to see or things that are even smaller than that, and you can't see them with a microscope either. So you need to use chemical techniques for that. So I study dental calculus, which is like dental plaque, the stuff that the dentist would scrape off of your teeth. So kind of like a dental hygienist for the dead. And I have a tiny little example here. You can't really see it, but there's a tiny little bit of stuff in the bottom of this tube, and that is a bit of dental calculus scraped off of the tooth. And within that calculus, you can find all kinds of things. You can find pollen grains and fungal spores, phytoliths, which are like little tiny bits of glass that plants make to give them structure and also defense. And sometimes they can be species specific. And starch granules and bacteria, DNA, and proteins. So they're just completely packed full of all of this information about somebody's life. But it's also, this is a scanning electron microscope picture of dental calculus, and you can see that it doesn't really form in distinct layers. There's lots of little bubbles and pockets of places where things can get trapped from when you're eating or breathing or anything that your mouth comes in contact with. And so it's really hard to tell when things are trapped in someone's mouth. So it could happen anytime. Usually calculus will start forming from when you're a teenager all the way through your life. And if you don't have any dental hygiene, it'll just keep building up bigger and bigger and bigger and trap all kinds of things that you come in contact with. But you can't really say that one thing was from when you were a kid or teenager and one thing was from when you were older. So it just gives an overall view of someone's life. And even then it can be a little bit patchy, because it's not going to incorporate everything you put in your mouth. Just every now and then something will by chance get trapped during the calcification process. So I'm going to tell you some really cool studies that have already been published looking at people's dental calculus. And usually what you want or what you get is an overview of a whole population of people and what they were eating. That's the most common thing to do in dental calculus studies. But this study was focused on one person because they had lapis lazuli in their teeth. And it ended up being a top 10 discovery of 2019, which was really exciting. And that's just what lapis lazuli looks like when it's raw and not processed. So this tooth is from medieval Germany, which was part of the Holy Roman Empire at the time. And this just gives you a view of the site and where the particular individual was from in the burial. And there's a lot of these manuscripts that are associated with this site. They're called illuminated manuscripts. And there's some examples on the left there. And people would paint these inside of holy books. And lapis lazuli was often used for, that's why Mary is blue, for example, in a lot of images of Mary, she's wearing blue, because lapis lazuli was extremely precious and more expensive than gold at the time. And the only place it came from was Afghanistan. Today, there's also, I believe, in Russia and in Chile, you can find lapis lazuli, but at this point in time, Afghanistan was the only supply. And you can see over on the right there, there's all of these little tiny, very bright blue particles. And I've probably looked at over 1,000 different calculus samples and never seen anything like this. And my colleagues at I wrote the paper with and were on the study with, they had already found these, and then they got me involved near the end of the study to do the scanning electron microscopy. I didn't do the Raman spectroscopy, but to look at the different kinds of blue pigments, so just so that we could be sure that it was lazurite. So you could see that all these different blue pigments that were available all have quite distinct chemistry. And the thing about lazurite is it doesn't have the common things you would find in something that's blue. So it doesn't have cobalt or copper or iron. It's a silicate material, so it's primarily silica, much like quartz. But because of the sulfur, I think makes it blue. And so this is what I did for this. There's you can see a couple of different spectra. So there's lapis lazuli, which has a lot of different material in it, but none of the things that you would normally find in a blue pigment, like azurite on the right, which has a lot of copper. They both have gold in them, but copper is huge in azurite. So that's just and most of the samples looked like that compared to lapis lazuli. They would have something that was very, very clearly not in lapis lazuli. This is just one of my favorite examples of the lazurite painting in one of the illuminated manuscripts. And this particular individual that we found the particles in was a female, and at the time, there's not a lot of evidence of women being allowed to use such a precious material. So she must have been a really highly skilled artist at the time and very trusted with this very precious material. So it's pretty exciting to be able to tell this woman's life and see how women were contributing to this form of artwork in medieval Germany. Another project that's closer to New Zealand, I did this for my PhD. It was in Vanuatu, and this was again looking more at the population level diet of the earliest colonists of Vanuatu, often called Lapida, part of the Lapida culture. These people came down initially from probably around Taiwan and came down through by Papua New Guinea, through the Bismarcks, and down into Vanuatu, which is the first place they came into remote Oceania about 3,000 years ago. And they're really well known for their very elaborate dentate stamped pottery, which you can see in this image here. This is a view of the site that they come from, above the hill above where the site is. So it's down in that bay. You could see there's a lot of vegetation, lots of stuff to eat. One of the coolest things from this study was finding banana seed phytoliths in their teeth. So they're quite blurry on this, but A and B are examples of what seed phytoliths look like. And you can see the whole seeds in the image below with the blue background. And seeds are really uncommon to find because most bananas now are domesticated, and the little tiny black things you see inside of bananas are not viable seeds. They're kind of like your appendix or something, just a vestigial thing that's left there. But leaves are quite common to find, which is what C and D are. So finding the seeds as well means that these bananas that they had with them were probably in the process of being domesticated, which is quite interesting. Other things that we found are examples of bark phytoliths, and there's a lot of different plants, mostly tree crops that are used where the bark is used for medicinal reasons in the Pacific. And so I think that this is probably what this is from. It could also just be processing plants for other things, like ripping bark off of things with your teeth, things like that, because people use their mouth as a tool as well as something to eat with. And the last example is looking at victims of the Great Irish Famine. In this project, we looked at microparticles and also protein in dental calculus to get an idea of how the diet represented in their teeth differed from the records in the workhouses that these people died in. These teeth are from Victorian Ireland. And the Great Famine is a little bit of a misnomer because there was actually plenty of food in Ireland. However, it was all being exported to England and other places. It wasn't. And so when the potato famine, when the potato plague or hit, or the fungus came, there wasn't a lot for the Irish people to eat because everything else that was edible was being exported. So a lot of people ended up having to go to these workhouses pictured on the left here, and you can kind of see where it fits in the map of the town there. And they would live there and have to work in order to get food. And thousands of people died in these workhouses because there wasn't enough food for them. And also relief food was sent from America in the form of corn, but nobody really knew how to cook corn. And so because it wasn't being cooked properly, it was actually leaching nutrients out of their bodies, which is what happens if corn isn't processed correctly. So the examples of what we found in this population, a lot of starch granules, so that would be mostly from wheat and oats, but also potato. And then with the proteins, you can see things like specific parts of things. So you could see that there was chicken egg white. So specifically egg white, not necessarily yolk. Probably the yolk was eaten as well. And then for milk, we could see that there was sheep milk and also cow milk. And in addition to the oat starch grains, we also found oat proteins, which was really interesting. And also some other like famine, what were considered famine foods that were not, more like weeds that are edible, that people were eating. That's just a very sad sculpture of some of the people who died in the famine, or representation of people who died during the famine. So yeah, that was just a quick overview of some examples of things that you can find with dental calculus. It's sometimes can be a little bit frustrating because you don't know what you're going to find. So it's both frustrating and exciting because you can find these amazing things and sometimes there will be nothing. So it's a mixed bag with this work.
Thank you so much, Monica, for sharing your expertise and just the range of questions that these types of techniques can be applied to at different scales of analyses, and the level of detail and information that can be gained as well.
Sure.